Today, I'm going over the section in Chapter 10 called The Decision to Forget. Unless you first know something, you cannot dissociate it. Knowledge must precede dissociation, so that dissociation is nothing more than a decision to forget. What has been forgotten then appears to be fearful, but only because the dissociation is an attack on truth. You are fearful because you have forgotten, and you have replaced your knowledge by an awareness of dreams, because you are afraid of your dissociation, not of what you have dissociated. When what you have dissociated is accepted, it ceases to be fearful. So in this first paragraph, Jesus is telling us that in the beginning we knew our truth, and we have now dissociated from our truth. That's why he's telling us, unless you first know something, you cannot dissociate it. So he's telling us right off the bat, once upon a time, we knew what our truth was. And that's the only reason that we were able to dissociate from it. We made a decision to forget it, to forget our truth. And then once we made that decision, what we dissociated appeared to be fearful. Then we became afraid of our truth, but only because the dissociation is an attack on truth. So as soon as we decided to dissociate from our truth and identify with ego, we began attacking our truth. And the only reason that our truth appears to be fearful is because we have forgotten it. And we replaced our truth with dreams. And he's telling us that really we are afraid that we dissociated, not what we dissociated from. Meaning, unconsciously, because we still know our truth deep down inside, we're not actually afraid of our real truth. What we're afraid of is that we decided to separate from our truth, that we decided to dissociate. And we feel incredibly guilty about that. That's where the fear is coming from, of this punishment that we're going to get from this guilt that we feel about dissociating from our truth. And all of this is happening unconsciously. Yet to give up the dissociation of reality brings more than merely lack of fear. In this decision lie joy and peace and the glory of creation. Offer the Holy Spirit only your willingness to remember, for he retains the knowledge of God and of yourself for you, waiting for your acceptance. Give up gladly everything that would stand in the way of your remembering, for God is in your memory. His voice will tell you that you are part of him when you are willing to remember him and know your own reality again. Let nothing in this world delay your remembering of him, for in this remembering is the knowledge of yourself. In this next paragraph, Jesus is telling us to give up our dissociation from our truth, which is that we are spirit, we are one with one another and with God, and that when we give up that dissociation, that decision we made to separate from our truth, that will bring us a lack of fear. We won't be fearful anymore. And in fact, we will feel joy and peace and the glory of creation. And what creation is extending love. That is naturally who and what we are. And he's telling us that we only have to be willing to remember. We don't have to make ourselves remember. We don't have to beat it into our mind what our truth is. We just need to be willing. And as soon as we're willing, the door opens for Holy Spirit to come in and start reminding us of our truth. Because the Holy Spirit was there the whole time. Our truth was there the whole time. But now we're opening the door a little bit for it to come in. So we only need to be willing. That's it. And he's telling us that Holy Spirit retains the knowledge of God and of who and what we truly are. And that Holy Spirit is just waiting for our acceptance of our truth. He's telling us to gladly give up everything of the illusory world, because that is what stands in the way of us remembering our truth. He's reminding us that God is in our memory. He's telling us that his voice will tell us that we are part of him, and that when we are willing to remember, Holy Spirit will bring our truth to us. He will bring our reality to us again. And he's urging us to not let anything of this world delay that decision for us to be willing to allow Holy Spirit into our mind. And he's telling us that by doing that, we will know ourself. To remember is merely to restore to your mind what is already there, right? Because we've never changed who and what we truly are. We are always spirit. We are always extending love. And he puts what is already there in italics because he's reminding us that who and what we really are has never changed. It's never gone away. It's always been there. You do not make what you remember. You merely accept again what is already there, but what was rejected. So we've always been who we truly are, extending love eternally in heaven with God and with one another. We've always been that. We just need to accept it because we have been rejecting it. The ability to accept truth in this world is the perceptual counterpart of creating in the kingdom. God will do his part if you will do yours. And his return in exchange for yours is the exchange of knowledge for perception. Nothing is beyond his will for you, but signify your will to remember him, and behold, he will give you everything but for the asking. So when he says the ability to accept truth in this world is the perceptual counterpart of creating in the kingdom, what he means is that creating in the kingdom is our truth. That's who and what we really are. But while we are in this false perception of separation within this illusory world, we have to practice forgiveness. In other words, remember our truth in order to awaken. So that is the perceptual counterpart to creating in the kingdom within this world, because it is the only thing that allows us to awaken, that reflects within the illusion what our truth is. Because our mistake is in perception. So we have to change our perception while we are dreaming. And by choosing the correct perception over and over and over again, every time we can remember to practice forgiveness, which means overlooking what is false to see what is true, overlooking ego to see spirit. He's telling us that God will do his part if we will do ours, which means practicing forgiveness, overlooking what is false to see what is true. That's how we let Holy Spirit into our mind. That's Holy Spirit's part. It's Holy Spirit's job to wake us up from this dream. Our part is to be willing to let Holy Spirit into our mind so that Holy Spirit can wake us up from this dream. And he's saying that when we do that, the exchange is knowledge for perception. Within the dream, we can only perceive. We cannot have knowledge. Knowledge only happens when we permanently awaken from the dream. So when we are allowing Holy Spirit into our mind and asking to perceive correctly, we keep doing that. We keep practicing within the dream. And then eventually we awaken and we are in knowledge because we've left the dream and we're permanently awake. And that's what he means by exchanging perception for knowledge, leaving the dream to return home to God, to our truth. He's reminding us that nothing is beyond his will for us. There's nothing that Holy Spirit can't do. His will for us is to awaken, and nothing is ever going to stop that. We can delay it as much as we want, but nothing's ever going to stop it because remember, the dream's already over. This entire illusory world, illusory universe, illusory multiverse was over in an instant. The Course tells us that not a note in heaven's song was missed when we had this tiny mad idea of this dream, this false world. It was over like that. But we are mentally reviewing it linearly over eons of time. So we will awaken because it's actually already happened. We're just dreaming that it didn't. That's why nothing is beyond his will for us. But he's reminding us that we have to be willing to allow Holy Spirit into our mind. And when we do that, he will give us everything. Simply because we asked. And this everything doesn't mean in this world. It doesn't mean you get to ask Holy Spirit to have X, Y, and Z material things within the world, or X, Y, and Z things within the illusory world. That's not what it means. The everything is your truth, is the oneness, is extending love forever, is extending love eternally in heaven with God and one another. And if that sounds boring to some egos out there, it's not. If you think about the best of the best of the best within the illusion, heaven is that times a gajillion. Okay? We could never even imagine within this illusory world what that type of bliss and ecstasy and complete love feels like. We have no idea here within this illusory world. So don't think that heaven sounds boring. It's not. When you attack, you are denying yourself. You are specifically teaching yourself that you are not what you are. So when we're denying ourselves and identifying with ego, we are teaching ourselves that we are separate, that we are ego, that we live in this illusion of pain and fear and death. And when we're doing that, we're teaching ourselves what we are not. Your denial of reality precludes the acceptance of God's gift because you have accepted something else in its place. If you understand that this is always an attack on truth, and truth is God, you will realize why it is always fearful. If you further recognize that you are part of God, you will understand why it is that you always attack yourself first. So he's reminding us that when we are choosing to identify with ego, that is attack. And we are attacking ourselves first because we have decided that we are separate. And when we decide that we are a separate ego, we've now decided that everyone else is a separate ego. Because remember, there's only one of us. He's telling us that we have denied our reality and accepted something else instead. That's we denied our wholeness and instead accepted separation, ego, fear. And that doing that, dissociating from our truth, accepting this something else in its place, that is an attack. And that's why it's always fearful. If you realize the complex havoc this makes of your peace of mind, you could not make such an insane decision. You make it only because you still believe it can get you something you want. Our decision to identify with ego is insane. We are making that decision because we think ego is going to get something that we want, even though it's not true at all. It follows then that you want something other than peace of mind, but you have not considered what it must be. That's why the ego's motto is seek and do not find. We haven't considered what this thing is that we think that ego is going to give us, but we have for sure decided that we don't want peace of mind because ego doesn't offer that. Yet the logical outcome of your decision is perfectly clear if you will only look at it. By deciding against your reality, meaning choosing ego over spirit, you have made yourself vigilant against God and his kingdom. All right? Because Jesus is always encouraging us to be vigilant for God and his kingdom. How do we do that? By choosing spirit, by practicing forgiveness, by overlooking the false world, to look beyond and to see spirit everywhere in everything, to see truth. That is being vigilant for God and heaven, for God and his kingdom. But when we are choosing ego instead and believing that we are separate and that everyone else is separate and we feel fear and lack and all the other things that egos believe, then we are being vigilant against God. So that's what we're choosing every single time we decide to believe in the ego and believe in this world. Every time we're doing that, we are being vigilant against God and his kingdom. And it is this vigilance that makes you afraid to remember him. We are afraid of punishment from God, for choosing not to remember him, for choosing to destroy heaven. That's what we believe we did with this dissociation. We are confused. And all of this is deeply, deeply, deeply unconscious. It's very, very, very deep. And that's why learning these things within this course is so incredibly helpful, because we've buried it under mounds and mounds and mounds of illusion. So without this instruction manual, it would be extremely difficult to figure out who and what we really are. So this section is reminding us that we have chosen to dissociate from God and heaven. We have chosen to dissociate from our truth. And that causes us a tremendous amount of fear and an extreme lack of peace. In order to feel peace, to heal the mistaken dissociation, we need to decide for God and his kingdom. We need to decide to remember to forgive. We need to decide to let Holy Spirit enter our mind so that we can be reminded of who and what we and everyone and everything else really is, which is spirit, which is love.